Good afternoon, everyone. This is Mike Romali here with the Hurricane Outlook and discussion for May 31st, 2022, around 3:20 p.m. Eastern Time. We have a lot to talk about today, including the potential for Tropical Storm Alex to be forming in the Gulf of Mexico over the next several days and what impacts it could be bringing to portions of Central Florida, Cuba, and the Bahamas during the next 5 to 6 days. So let's go ahead and jump straight into everything. Taking a wide look across the tropical Atlantic this afternoon, we notice that we have a pretty active setup, especially in portions of the Gulf of Mexico and Caribbean. Very disorganized area of shower and thunderstorm activity right now that is near the Yucatan Peninsula and over Mexico. This is remnant energy associated with Hurricane Agatha. The remnant circulation of that has now moved almost now into the Bay of Campeche, which is this area down here in the southern Gulf. We also have a new Central American gyre, basically a big area of low pressure that is forming in this entire region. So we really have two areas of low pressure, the remnant circulation here from Agatha and a much broader circulation overall that is encompassing this entire region. And this is going to set the stage for a very big picture type-esque deal where we could have multiple competing areas of low pressure and the potential for something to form and move northeast out of that towards Florida. So if we look here at the remnant circulation of Agatha, again, Agatha made landfall yesterday right down here near Cuba, or not near Cuba, in Mexico. And it was a very strong Category 2 hurricane and has now since continued to move northeastward and is now approaching the tip here of the Bay of Campeche, and this is going to slow down and kind of drift more eastward over the next several days. You can kind of see that already beginning to happen. It's slowing down and now beginning to drift a little bit more towards the east here, so it's not going to quickly reemerge, but there is still some associated spin in this entire region, and that might help to kick off something down the road. If we take a look here at the zoomed out satellite picture, we notice that there's a broad area of spin, but there's also a lot of shear that is in the Bay of Campeche so far. You can kind of see those stretched out cirrus plumes at the very tops here are kind of blowing very strongly away from the center of the screen towards the right. And this indicates that we have some pretty strong shear in this region. And that's not going to be really supportive for any sort of tropical system. We also have an associated area of spin down here closer towards Belize, and this might be the new area to watch as this kind of slowly drifts around and maybe makes its way towards the northeast over the next several days. So the National Hurricane Center is officially highlighting this area as a code red. It is now a 70% chance of development, or a high risk now, for becoming at least a tropical depression, if not a tropical storm, over the next several days. We notice that the general direction continues to have this system generally pinned towards the northeast, and this could affect portions of Florida as early as late this week or this weekend. We are now in that time frame where we feel confident that we could at least have a rain and semi-wind maker in portions of Central and South Florida within the next 5 to 6 days. And that is why Florida now, the landmass of Florida that is highlighted within this red area. Now, this is not necessarily representative of the track, but this is more representative of where in this area we could have a system form. So we could have a system form as, far west and northwest as, the tip of the Yucatan, or somewhere over Cuba is where we could have something form. So there is a wide range here of a couple hundred miles in which we could have something form. And we'll talk about why that is here in a minute. Looking at the Gulf of Mexico sea surface temperatures, this is the tops here. This is the very skin of the water here. So it is the very top surface of the water, not the water depth, not the warm water depth, but the water temperature at least at the surface. And we notice that in this entire area where the National Hurricane Center has highlighted, generally speaking, this area is very favorable in terms of the water temperature for tropical development. We notice that the sea surface temperatures are at least 28 degrees Celsius, if not closer to 29 degrees Celsius And this is going to be very supportive for intense convection, thunderstorms, and that could definitely lead towards a tropical system trying to develop here within the next 4 to 5 days and eventually moving northeastward. But that's not all. We have to look here at the upper ocean heat content, and we talked about this over the last several weeks here. What upper ocean heat content is, it's just really a measure of the warm water at depth. Tropical systems like tropical storms and hurricanes do not necessarily like cooler water below the surface. You could have 95-degree Fahrenheit water temperatures at the surface, but it doesn't mean anything if 10 meters below that, the water temperature is really less than about 79 Fahrenheit. So it doesn't really matter. But what this really quantifies here, as you get in towards the lighter blue shades here, so these kind of lighter blue shades that I'm kind of highlighting right now, this is indicative, this whole area really is favorable for hurricanes to develop and maintain themselves. And the warmer colors here indicate higher upper ocean heat content and the more warm water at depth. And there's a considerable amount of that in the Caribbean here and this warm loop eddy in the Gulf of Mexico. And we talked about how that if something were to come down this way, that we could definitely have something take advantage of that. And as it stands so far, there definitely could be something if something tries to sneak its way towards Florida here, that it at least has somewhere in some area an avenue here to work within with those higher upper ocean heat content. So certainly there could be at least a tropical storm, a weaker tropical storm within this area. Now, why are we not expecting a hurricane? Where could this go? Well, let's take a look at that. This is the GFS forecast. This is the 12Z run, valid for 2 p.m. this afternoon, and we're taking a look here at the 850 millibar vorticity. So all this is, really simply put, these darker shades here of orange and red, this indicates higher spin in the atmosphere, higher cyclonic spin at 5,000 feet above the ground. That is 850 millibars is roughly about 5,000 feet above ground level. And so what we're looking at here is cyclonic vorticity that is shaded. And again, we talked about what we kind of want to see here. And just to kind of reference yourself, if we really were to see a very well-organized storm, this would be what we're kind of pointing to right here. This area of vorticity, that was Hurricane Agatha about 24 hours ago. Well, now, again, Agatha has now moved over the very mountainous terrain of Mexico, and we're going to start to see some vorticity begin to reemerge into the Gulf of Mexico or Caribbean. Now, what ends up happening here within the next 48 hours, so this is valid for 8 a.m. Thursday morning, we have a much broader, much larger, considerably larger area of low pressure that begins to develop. This whole area indicates lower pressure and enhanced cyclonic spin. So that is an anticyclonic flow in the northern hemisphere, or counterclockwise flow in the northern hemisphere. So wind flow that is coming around like this instead of going like that. Okay. So we have this enhanced area of cyclonic spin down here, and eventually we start to get something that tries to consolidate. Now, on the GFS forecast here, we have competing areas of low pressure. We have one here, another here, and there's just too many, and it's very hard for something to organize before it just starts to slam in and interact with the land here that is Cuba and the Yucatan Peninsula. Now, the other thing here that we're going to be watching is exactly how much moisture is there. Now, on the GFS forecast, there is plenty of moisture, but there's some very dry air that's lurking just north of there in the Gulf of Mexico, and that might significantly hamper any development that can occur. Now, on the European forecast, this is the 12Z Euro run, we notice that, again, we have a much more consolidated area of low pressure. It does not take as long for an area of low pressure to start developing. And if we compare that to the GFS forecast, again, it takes a lot longer and something doesn't get going until it's well clear of any landmass. It's well out into the subtropical Atlantic at this point, whereas the European here begins to consolidate a system on approach to Florida and then eventually strengthens it quite a bit after moving across Florida and the Gulf Stream. Now, is this a plausible solution? Absolutely. Now, one of the things that we'll also be looking for, again, is what we anticipate with the upper level wind patterns. This is the European 200 millibar wind. So this is at around 30 to 39,000 feet, or the typical cruising altitude of airliners, really. And we notice that as we continue to move forward, this is by about 5 a.m. on Friday morning, what we have is a anticyclone over portions of the Caribbean and Central America. This is quite a bit of a problem because we don't really have a lot of supporting shear, or shear rather, that is really supportive for tropical development that is over the Caribbean. In fact, we notice that there's, almost, 50, 40 to 50 knots here approaching portions of Florida. And so with that being said, any storm that is to form in this region is going to have a very tough time. Now, there will be diffluent flow aloft, meaning there will be diverging air aloft, which will help because diverging air aloft creates convergence or upward moving air at the surface, and that creates a vacuum chamber basically and rising air where we may have a semi-organized area of tropical development within the Caribbean or Gulf. And in fact, here on the GFS, we notice that again, it's just getting absolutely torn apart by shear. And you end up with a pretty modest system that eventually crosses Florida and then deepens through other processes that are not tropical related. So there could be a system. Now let's see what the ensembles play into this. So this is the 0Z ensembles here off the European. And we notice here that if we go to hour 96, this is again 8 p.m. on a Friday night, we end up with a rather large amount of possible outcomes here. So there's plausible outcomes from a weak area of low pressure that is over the Yucatan Peninsula to anywhere that is over Cuba to a more consolidated system approaching the Florida Keys and southern Florida Peninsula. Okay, let's see what the GFS has to show. Well, the GFS is quite a bit different here because this is where it diverges. At the same hour 96, you can kind of see, compare and contrast the two different models here, where the GFS has, again, areas of weaker low pressure that are in the Caribbean or Gulf, but a much more concentrated area that is in the Florida Straits and Florida Keys region, rather than approaching the Florida Peninsula. And this difference is going to cause the potential for, rainfall to be less or enhanced. If we go back to the European and we kind of move in here and take a look at the different sectors, if we really move down, we can see that the Euro is going to show much stronger vorticity that is crossing Florida, enhanced rainfall. We can look at the simulated radar here. We notice that again, there's a pretty wide chunk of rain over this entire area and quite a bit of rainfall, upwards of just about 7 inches in spots that we could be seeing over the next several days as the system crosses Florida. But if we were to take a look here at the GFS forecast, we notice that the GFS is going to be a little bit less bullish here, and in fact really doesn't do much at all, as the operational run carries a weak area of low pressure through the Florida Straits and Cuba and into the Bahamas and lifts it northeastward and basically leaves only the Florida Keys with any substantial rainfall out of this. So there's going to be differences here. The European model today, the 12Z run, did cave a little bit towards a weaker solution, which is what the GFS, CMC, and Icon models have all flipped to. And we'll see if this trend continues. There's still quite a bit of differences here between the GFS and Euro, but certainly there could be at least somewhere in Florida, we could be dealing with some rather substantial rain impacts. Now, the wind, I'm not really going to say that's a non-threat, maybe 30, 40, 50 mile per hour gusts, but it's not going to be more than a typical thunderstorm on a hot summer day in Florida. That's what I'm going to really say it as. For everybody here in Florida, this is not something that you should be necessarily hyped up about, worried about. It's just mainly another rainstorm, thunderstorm type day where, we could easily get, 60, 70 mile per hour winds within a thunderstorm in Florida in the summer. So not really something to be super worried about. It is something to pay attention to. Of course, if you're new here to Florida, it is something to pay attention to for sure. Just have and stock up on, some extra food and water, but, don't go hoarding things. This is not going to be, a Category 5 hurricane or anything major like that. So there is really no need to worry at this point. All right. That being said, hope you have a great rest of your afternoon and evening. Of course, I am Michael O'Malley. I'll talk to you guys again some more over the next coming days.